So today we're going to talk about building leaders. This is often a responsibility we have in HR, or at least something we have a lot of influence over. That's all coming up now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams, and this is the HR Hub. On this show, you get expert insight into anything related to HR. Please subscribe to the show or the podcast to keep learning from my guests. Today, my guest is again Corina Walsh. Corina is a leadership coach, a keynote speaker on a number of HR-related topics. She's also the host of her own podcast called The People and Culture Success Show. And actually, she was recommended to me by a friend who was a listener of that show. Hi, Corina. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Glad to have you back. So we're going to talk about building leaders this time, and a little bit succession planning related, a little bit training and development related. But in your experience, how do you go about identifying emerging leaders?
Emerging leaders, to me, stand out not just because of their technical skills. So it's really easy to take a star technical employee and assume that because they're so good at the technical side of their work, then therefore they must be able to lead the team who does that work. And I understand that frame of mind, and that's not necessarily wrong. What I would also add is that you need to be looking for the people who are people.
Mm-hmm.
Who are the strong people leaders emerging in your organization? When I say people leaders, I'm talking about who are the employees who already have some coaching skills or mentoring skills? Who are the employees who other employees are going to for help? And that employee has the patience and the empathy to help others. And they actually seem like they genuinely care about others. So who maybe already has those natural abilities toward people, not just the technical side. And, you know, when you are technically really good at something, like so you have a high level of technical competence, it can be really joyful to teach that to someone else. So I think that's why technical leaders often look like they'll be good team leaders. And I'm not saying they won't be. Plenty of them are, right? But there's a whole other set of people skills. Like if you have an employee who typically shies away from conflict or shies away from difficult conversations, is that person really going to make a good manager? Because you are going to have to give constructive feedback and have difficult conversations as a manager. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So you're looking for people who have strong communication skills, they care about others, they've already naturally taken a coaching role, and they seem to have some empathy and some patience for others. I think those are really telltale signs that you have an emerging leader on your hands.
I find, and I don't know if this is true, but it just made me think that some of those people don't want to be leaders. Yeah. Like it's such a thankless role. Everybody's pointing their finger at you. Or it seems like it anyway.
Oh, it can be. And unfortunately, sometimes people get into their first management role and see how thankless and challenging it can be. And then they come to me and they're like, I'm thinking about going back to being an individual performer. And that's, I think, the heartbreaking conversation for me. Because then I ask, have you been given the foundational training you need to be in your first management role? And the answer is usually no. According to Gallup, the average manager is in their role for 10 years before they receive any leadership development. So that's a tough pill to swallow, right? So I never blame anyone for being hesitant to take on that management role or move into their first leadership role. What I will say is that I also tell people I'm very transparent and I don't put on any rose-colored glasses when I'm explaining how tough a management role can be, but I also articulate what the joy of leading others can be, how good it feels when you develop someone else or see them move on to another role. And you played a part in that. So yes, it can be thankless, but yes, it can also be very fulfilling if you have the right tools in your toolbox. So before you go and kind of cancel yourself out of the running, take a step back and ask, why? What about the role seems daunting or challenging to you? And how might you use those wonderful people skills you already have to shine in that role and actually make a difference and not do things the old-fashioned way. But then on the other side, I also advise companies to have two different leadership paths. So one would be the traditional people leadership path where you actually lead teams, but then there should be another leadership path where you build up your expertise in one particular area and become more of a technical expert leader or a business leader on the business side of things where you don't necessarily have a team. We've seen this as more of a trend lately where companies do have two leadership paths, one who has people reporting to them, one who does not have people reporting to them. And you can almost be more like an internal consultant or internal entrepreneur or something like that. And I encourage that, absolutely, because not even if you can be in a management role and you're suited for it, doesn't mean you want to be, as you mentioned. But why should your career be halted because of that? So there's more than one way to move up through an organization. We just have to open our minds and be a little bit creative about that leadership path.
How is this process of identifying an emerging leader, how is this different or related to succession planning?
It's definitely related, 100%. I consider it to be like a subset of succession planning, where succession planning can be broad. It can be very detailed and very focused on business continuity. That can often be the focus of making sure that there's operational continuity there. Your leadership succession is much more immediate. So if you own a big family corporation that started with, the father or the mom and the mom and the dad kind of situation, succession might be getting your own children ready to take over. That could be a leadership succession, but it could also be a business continuity piece as well. But the type of leadership learning path, that type of succession that I help companies work on is much more immediate. It's more about we're growing. We know we're going to be adding a lot of new employees on the front end. So therefore, we're going to need more team leads. Are we going to promote from within or are we going to bring in external team leads? At the front line of leadership, it's more likely that they're going to promote from within. And then you want to be able to have that method for spotting your emerging leaders. But then if you look at higher levels of leadership, potentially you could be bringing in leaders from the outside. So that leadership succession planning is more about doing your talent audit and seeing what kind of talent you have now, what skills do they have, and where are those leadership skills gaps? How are you going to fill them? Can you fill them internally? Or do you need to bring in outside leaders, hire outside leaders? Because there's pros and cons to both. And when it comes to the leadership planning, I think we're looking at a time frame of 1 year to 3 to 5 years, whereas succession could be, you're looking at 15 to 20 years out. Things change so fast in our organizations nowadays when it comes to leadership planning. I think we should probably only be looking at 1 to 4 years out. And things are just changing too fast.
Right. And people don't stay in jobs and then move companies so much more often than they used to.
Exactly.
So what should HR be aware of when we think about the transition from being an individual contributor to your first leadership role? What does HR need to be thinking about and acting on?
HR needs to be thinking about what are the different competencies required at each level of leadership, because each level of leadership you are at will demand different things from you and therefore requires a different set of competencies. Transitioning from individual contributor or individual performer to now being responsible for the performance of others and getting other people to perform. That's where you need your foundational leadership skills, right? You need to understand the difference between micromanagement, macromanagement, delegating, feedback, all the foundation skills. And then you need to, even that first leadership transition, you need to be able to help that team lead or supervisor or whatever the job title is, how they may struggle with transitioning from being a peer to now being in charge of their peers. And I did a 3-episode series on my podcast about that, about the 3 biggest challenges that new managers face. And it's much more about mindset than it is about technical abilities. So that's the first thing there to watch out for. Then you get promoted up into typically a mid-level or middle management role. That's a whole nother set of skills. Now you're sandwiched. You're in a management sandwich, right? You've got your reporting up to executives, influencing up with the executives, and now you've got to mentor and lead team leads and supervisors. Whole nother skill set of competencies, whole nother set of mental challenges to face there. And then when someone transitions up to the executive level, again, whole different set of competencies, but they're not so much the technical competencies anymore. They're much more about strategy, decision-making, critical thinking, vision, connecting vision to strategy. So this is why I encourage leadership learning plans, so that you make sure you don't miss any of the competencies on your path upwards, on your leadership path upwards.
What mistakes do we typically see new leaders making, and how do we in HR help them?
One of the biggest mistakes I see new leaders make is the mindset transition from peer to peer leader. Trying to still be one of the peers, still be one of the friends. You can't. It's gone. Let it go. And HR may have to have a tough conversation with the team lead or supervisor about that. You can't be friends and lead at the same time. At least that's my philosophy. By all means, feel free to argue with me. You know, anyone wants to email me and tell me differently, go ahead. I think you're on tricky territory if you try to remain friends with the people that you're trying to lead. I think oftentimes those are the managers who are calling me, asking me how to deal with that because they've run into something. Not owning your new role. Like stepping into a management and leadership role, there's an energetic shift that has to happen because you're not an individual performer anymore. You're now responsible for motivating, engaging, and handling the performance of other people. And there is kind of a mental and attitude and energetic shift that has to happen. And I see a lot of first-time managers not fully stepping into their role or owning it. So I might have one of these managers in one of my group programs, and they might say something like, "Oh, but if I do that, then I'm the one setting the expectation." And I say, "Yeah, that's your job. Welcome to management." And they're just not stepping into the role. And I've heard new managers say things like, "Oh, I just don't understand why we all can't get along. I just want to be one big happy family." No, I'm sorry. That's not the goal either. Do you know any functional families? You're not family, but I can explain team dynamics to you and explain to you how teams work. And if you're interested in figuring out how to work like a team, not a family, because I don't recommend that, I can help you with that. So a couple of the mindset things that I see are maybe the biggest mistakes that new managers make.
I think back to my first leadership role.
All of us, we all made those mistakes, right?
Right. I suppose it's just how bad and for how long.
It's all good. You don't know what you don't know.
This is an interesting question, and I really like this question, actually, and now I want to know the answer. How can HR accelerate that leadership development or that leader's development so that they move through those mistakes to, being an effective leader faster instead of wallowing in it and staying there?
And this is going to sound very self-fulfilling, and it sort of is. Let's be transparent. Get them in leadership development. Get them in the appropriate leadership development. You knew I was going to say that. But there is a certain type of foundational new manager training that they can do that will help them get ahead of all this. Mm-hmm. But then there's also plenty of free resources out there too. Like I said, I purposely developed 3 episodes on my podcast because I was getting the same issues and the same questions from managers of how do I transition from peer to peer leader now? And how do I manage someone who's older than me? How do I manage someone with more experience than me? And this is going to happen now when you become supervisor, team lead, whatever. So get them the development, but then mentoring as well. Like if there is a particularly good leader in your organization who's willing to take on some of the newer managers as a mentor, mentee, I think that's wonderful.
Yes.
My only caution there is make sure that your mentor has strong leadership skills that did not come from a time when that doesn't really work anymore. I think about a lot of really awful management strategies from the 90s, like the feedback sandwich and things like that. Like you want to make sure that your mentors are up to date on leadership strategies for today's workforce as well.
Can I just jump in here? The feedback sandwich is not a thing.
Not a good thing. It's a thing. It's not a good thing. Do not serve that sandwich at your workplace. No, it's very stale. Do you want me to explain why?
Yes.
Okay. So the feedback sandwich, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is when you sandwich the positive feedback sandwich the constructive feedback with positive. So you say something positive, something constructive, and then something positive. It's a communication style from the 90s. It's still in the textbooks in universities.
Totally it is. Totally it is. What's better? What's the alternative?
Oh, the alternative is well, first of all, I advise my clients and all the managers I train and coach, have those conversations separately. You want to give positive feedback separately because if you sandwich feedback, one of two things is going to happen. They're not going to hear the positive and they're only going to hear the constructive, or they're not going to hear the constructive because they only heard the positive. Have those conversations separately. Give positive feedback the minute you see an employee doing something right, because the behavior that gets recognized gets repeated. Have the constructive feedback conversations on its own. You're focusing on one thing in that conversation, whatever the issue is in that moment. You only focus on one thing. I train my clients on a specific process that's all about being upfront with the situation that you noticed. Like, what did you observe in terms of their performance or their behavior? What do you think is the impact of that? And then you tell them why you're giving them that feedback. But the why of the feedback, which a lot of managers miss, has to be something that's important to them.
The manager.
So, no, the employee who's receiving the feedback.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
Because you're trying to get buy-in, you're trying to get ownership for them to accept their performance issue. So I might say something like, Andrea, I know you're interested in moving up in the organization, and you wouldn't want something like this to get in the way of that. That's why I'm giving you this feedback. So you take a more altruistic approach to the feedback and let them know that you're giving them this feedback because you genuinely care about their career and you don't want anything to get in the way of their career progress.
It sounds a little bit like radical candor.
Yes. It's very...
Just happen to have that sitting there.
Yeah. Candor with caring.
Yeah.
Candor with caring.
How do we help someone who's wants to move up, but is not ready now, and they may, or they may never be ready?
I think we do people a disservice by not being honest with them. To touch to the Radical Candor book that you just picked up there, I think we really do people a disservice when we're not honest with them about their potential and where they're going to go. And I have been...
Can I just interrupt you?
Yeah.
So it could just be me. Maybe it's not just me, but I feel it's so arrogant for me. I mean, I asked the question, but it's so arrogant for me to make a pronouncement on someone else's career. Like, what do I really know? I could be totally wrong.
I get it. I get that point of view. I really do. And I've had people come to me about that, but it's a responsibility of the role that you're in. If you look at it not from a place of, who am I to do this? But you look at it from, I'm going to own my role as a manager or a HR manager, whatever role you're in, and take on the responsibility of being honest with someone and helping them build their self-awareness. Clear is kind. That's Brene.
That is her name. Yes.
Clear as kind.
Yeah.
So those are tough conversations to have.
Yeah.
I appreciate that you may need to consult with someone like you or me to get ready for that conversation. The reason that I'm adamant that you should have the conversation is because I've been brought in to try and help deal with a situation that has become upsetting because someone has been operating for 10 years the same way, and no one has told them that the way they're operating isn't going to get them anywhere. And now they're wondering what the heck is going on. Why haven't I moved anywhere in 10 years? And it's in her book. It's in Radical Candor.
Yes, no.
You're going to look at someone after 5 years of them performing the same way and say, I know no one jumped in to tell you that the way you've been doing this is wrong for 5 years. And we've just kind of maybe, hurt your career path by not telling you. I mean, to me, those are worse conversations to be having.
Yeah.
Sitting someone down and saying, I know you want to move ahead. Here's what it would take for you to move ahead. Here's where I see opportunities for you to build up your skills. If you could demonstrate that you've done that, I think you might have a chance. But don't say that if you don't really feel that. And get a second opinion. There are tons of leadership assessments out there. There's emotional intelligence assessments. That's one of the ones I use. When someone sees results in a report, there's no turning back from that. It's not subjective anymore.
Where can someone at HR learn more about building up leaders?
Absolutely. I have free resources on my site. I do have a guide to help develop a leadership learning plan where I outline exactly what skills and competencies you need at each level of leadership. So that's always available. I would encourage them to keep listening to you for sure, because you've been putting in some amazing resources. For HR managers, you can listen to my podcast as well, the People and Culture Success Show. And if anyone wants a list of some really great books, like you already showed us one of them, Radical Candor.
Yeah, I did.
I have my preferred book list as well, which I'm always updating. So people can feel free to contact me at shiftpd.com or follow me on LinkedIn.
Okay. I might email you about your preferred reading list.
Absolutely.
I suspect there's going to be some overlap.
Oh, I would think so.
Well, thanks, Corina. I love that. I'm going to reflect again, because I've reflected on this before, about the idea that clear is kind and that it's part of our job. However, we have reached the end of this episode. I can't talk about it anymore. Corina and I did an episode on trends in leadership, and the link to that's right there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.